All right, welcome. My name is Mendel Jacobs. Welcome to another JPN Medical Ethics Review. It's my great honor to welcome Rabbi Yoni Kadish to give this lecture. Rabbi Kadish is a current M3 at New York Medical College and received the smicha as rabbinical ordination from Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, otherwise known as REITs. Yoni did his shimush under Rabbi Kripke of Torah College, an exemplar of rabbinic leadership in the modern world. And from what I hear, though my Jewish geography is sometimes off, there are some Dr. Kadishes of note that are leaders in the medical field as well. With his extensive background in both medical and religious fields, as well as leadership in both the rabbinical and medical education pathways, Rabbi soon-to-be Dr. Kadish, brings a unique perspective to the often complex ethical and moral issues that face the healthcare industry. Today, he'll be lecturing on the topic of if a physician is really ever off duty from a moral, ethical, and halachic perspective. The topic is based, at least in part, discusses the corresponding source booklet or chabura from medicalhalacha.com from Rabbi Sprung. Without further ado, Rabbi Kadish.
Thank you for that introduction, Menachem or Mendel. First of all, there's just my father and any other distinguished people on this chabura. So also just one point of introduction. I am not an expert on medical halacha, so please do not pass them based off this chabura, and we're here to learn together, and that's really the point of this. You can ask questions whenever you'd like. I can try to answer them. If not, we can try to answer them together. And as Mendel mentioned, a lot of this is based off Rabbi Sprung's chaburas from medicalhalacha.org or .com. Okay, so the topic of tonight's chabura is a physician ever really off duty? So just to start off with two of probably thousands of scenarios, especially anybody who's in a family of doctors knows that the scenarios are endless. But we'll start off with these two. So a doctor, that's you, scenario one, you are leaving your office to go to a simcha in the family, and a patient calls and says their child has a rash, fever, and a cough and wants you to see them because you are their primary care physician and know them, i.e. the child, best. Do you have to go and see them, or are you allowed to go ahead to your simcha? That's scenario one. And a similar scenario is you're at a family simcha over Shabbos, on Shabbos, and somebody comes knocking on your door after finding out that you're in town and says that they want you to see their grandmother who's feeling unwell. Again, a similar scenario, not necessarily where they know you personally, but they know your expertise. Do you have to go ahead and stop your Suda or the Simcha and go ahead to tend to these patients? So I guess this is really a chabura which does a lot of review and chazara of the core mitzvos, and as we'll see, there are a couple, forming it as a question, but is there a mitzvah refuah? And if so, where does it come from? So we obviously know there is. The famous one, which many know about, is from V'rapo Yirape. We are not going to go into that source too much, although we may touch on it. It's going to be more other sources, but really the crux of where the mitzvah of refuah comes from and what the boundaries of that are. So to start off, we're going to start with a couple of Gemaras, and then I'll work our way down to common day poskim. So first Gemara is the Gemara in Bava Kama, which is not in the packet, but it leads into many of the sources in the packet. So this is actually discussing, there are many Tanoim that Yeshua made when he came into Eretz Yisrael. And one of the things there are, which is the first line of the Gemara, one of the things is Hatoa bein akramim, mafsig v'yoreg and mafsig v'ola. That if you're lost amongst the vineyard, you're allowed to go ahead and chop trees down and the like in order to go down to find that person. And also when you're leaving, you're allowed to go ahead and chop down trees and bushes and the like. So the Gemara goes and says, as I just explained. Until you extract that person who's lost in the vineyard and you bring him back to the city, or to a common road, i.e. out of danger. And similarly, if you yourself, right, are lost in the vineyard, you're allowed to basically chop your way around and get out to the city or to a road. So my v'chein, so the Gemara asks the kasha, the question of what's the difference between hara chavero and the v'chein, i.e. who? You yourself versus seeing somebody else. So the Gemara answers, when you see your friend who's lost in the vineyard, you know where to go and get him because you see where he is. He doesn't know where he is, but you're going ahead and saving him. Right. But you yourself, so you're lost in the vineyard, you don't know where to go. So are you allowed to go ahead and just chop, not for no purpose, but really trying to find your way out versus a direct path when you see a friend in there? So the Gemara answers, so that's what it's coming to teach us. You might have thought that you would have to be Nahader B'Ei Mitzri. You might have thought that you have to like go on the border and not necessarily be able to just chop around and try to get your way out. Kamas Malan, that both whether you see a friend, which is a fairly direct path, or whether you yourself are lost in a vineyard, you can make your way out by whatever means that means. And there's no problem with quote unquote damaging because you have to get out. So then what I highlighted is the Gemara asks, what's this takana or this tanai of Yoshua? It's a pasuk in the Torah, the Tanya, Hashavaz Gufo Minayin. Where do we know that a person is supposed to return somebody to his body, basically return him back to where he was? You have to return him to his previous status. So we see that there's already a pasuk in the Torah that tells us you have to do this. So what is this tanai? So the Gemara answers, that the pasuk just tells us that you have to go ahead and return the person to his original status. So that just would mean that maybe I would just have to go along the border, and again, I wouldn't be able to do this whole chopping business. So also, who talking the mastic the older mastic v'yored. So that's why Yeshua came, and he said that you can go ahead and chop around. That's the special new enactment that he allowed. Obviously, what I highlighted is we already see that there's this concept of returning somebody to his original status, hashavaz gufa, returning his body to the way it was. So now we go to probably the most important source in this whole sugya, is the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which starts off gufa, which gufa is a reference to the stage in the Gemara earlier, but the Gemara says minayin l'ro as chaveros shutavei benar o chaya go raso o listim ba'in love. We have three cases of basically life or death, where somebody is drowning in the river, or a wild animal is dragging him, instantly going to kill him, or you have armed robbers that are coming to steal money from him, and again, they're armed robbers. So where do we know that if you see any of these scenarios going on, you are chayiv to save the person? You're not allowed to stand idly by when your friend is in danger. Dam is a reference to his life. So you're not allowed to stand on it idly by. So now, based on what we just saw in the previous Gemara in Bava Kama, what do you mean? Why are you telling us this pasuk of Lo Samar Adam Reacha? We already know that from a different source. The Gemara says, Abedas Gufa Minayin, Hamalomar Vahashiv Osalo. Where do we know that if somebody lost his body, you have to return it to him? The pasuk says, Vahashiv Osalo, you have to return it to him. So what is this special pasuk of Lo Samar Adam Reacha coming to teach us? So the Gemara answers, again, these two lines are very important. Had you only learned it out from over there, from the pasuk of Ahashivosalo, you would have thought that that only means that you yourself have to go ahead and save this person. But to go ahead and to quote unquote bother and pay somebody else to save this person, you might have thought you wouldn't have to do that. So Kamash Malan, that's what the pasuk of Lo Samar Adam Reacha is coming to teach us. That had you only had the pasuk of Ahashivosalo, I would have thought that that only means I have to go ahead and save the person myself, like we saw in the Gemara in Bava Kama, where you have to go down and save this guy from the vineyard who's lost. But how do I know that I would have to go ahead and expend the money on that? So that's what the special pasuk of Lo Samar Adam Reacha is coming to teach us. So now we're going to have actually a little machlokas on how to understand the reading of this Gemara. So this is Rashi and the Chedush Aran over there. So we'll start with Rashi. That's usually who we start with. Again, we'll start with the Divrei Maschil Kamash Malan, where Rashi explains that what is the Kamash Malan? How do we fully understand that? So he's going to go ahead and read that into the pasuk of Lo Samar. Rashi says, Lo Samar Adam Re'acha. That pasuk of don't stand idly by when your friend's blood is in danger. So Lo Samar Al Atzmacha. Don't stand by yourself. You don't look after only yourself. Mashma Ela Choser Al Kol Tzadim Shelo Yovad Dam Re'acha. Yeah, about Dam Re'acha. Rather, what you should do is go ahead and search out every single means possible. It says Kol Tzadim, every angle, so that your friend does not lose his body, basically. So Rashi does two things here. He first of all reads it into the pasuk, which is, we'll see, is unique. And he also then says that you have to go ahead and do it every single thing. So that's a little bit of a, if you remember, I can go back for a second. If this works. The Gemara didn't really say that specifically. The Gemara said that you have to go ahead and spend money to do this. Rashi, however, understands that spending money was really just a reference to the fact that you have to do everything, and included in that is spending money. So those are 2 points to make on Rashi. However, the Ran, which is on the right side, he explains the Gemara slightly differently. He says, well, the first thing is just a quote of the Gemara, and then he says, the second line, don't do what Rashi just did. Rashi just read the Gemara into the pasuk, the chiddush of what the Gemara says the pasuk is teaching us into the actual pasuk. Just don't do that. No, the pasuk just means what it means. It's just from the fact that continue reading. Just from the high time of ksivi trei krai. The Ram says that no, really it's only coming to teach us that you have to spend money. You obviously have to do it yourself, but you also then have to spend money. Not necessarily an all-inclusive definition, like Rashi says, where you'd have to be master al kol stadim, to go through every angle, try to find somebody else, do X, Y, and Z. Rather, it just means that you have to do it yourself, or you have to pay money, because he understands, he's not reading into the pasuk, as he points out. He understands that it's just from the fact that there's an extra pasuk. You have a hashavot zaro, and then you also have a lo samad. So just because there's two things seemingly teaching the same thing, we have to teach something slightly extra, but not that the actual pasuk should be read the way Rashi reads. Okay, so again, this is going to be a very important Gemara that we're going to come back to many times. So that's the machlokas between Rashi and the Ran. And then the third Gemara is in the Nedarim. So sorry, it is actually slightly wrong. This is in the Nedarim Mem Aleph on the base, not Mem on the base. It's going off the Mishnah on, I think, Lamed Ches on the base, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Lamed Ches on the base. We're talking about where somebody makes a vow not to get hana from his friend. And the Mishnah says, over there on Lamed Ches, we'll see exactly who's making the neder, which way it is it the patient or the doctor, but one of them is making a neder, and the doctor is not allowed to heal a nefesh, a soul, but he is allowed to heal money. So now the obvious question is, who's making the vow, and what is the reference to nefesh, and what is the reference to mammon? That's what this Gemara is discussing. So the Gemara starts off, Heichi Ketani. So what is this referencing? If it's coming to tell me that when the Mishnah says refuas nefesh, that healing of the soul is talking about where you be able to do that for free, and refuas mammon is bischar, and refuas mammon meaning the compensation, and that would be aser, right? Refuas nefesh, the Mishnah said is okay, refuas mammon is not okay. So lisni hachi rapayu bechinam avalo bischar. If that's really all the Mishnah was coming to teach us, then the Mishnah should have just said that straight out. Why does it have to use this almost by code of saying refuas nefesh and refuas mammon? And also, just to point out, we'll see on the round in a second, but this is referencing where the doctor said he's not going to get hana from the patient. So that's what this is talking about. So that's why the doctor would not be allowed to take compensation. He wouldn't be allowed to take pay for that. So that's what we're assuming the direction of the vow is going right now, where the doctor says he doesn't want to get hana from the patient. The Gemara says, no. Because again, based off this question of why doesn't it just say that straight out in the Mishnah? Ella, the refuas nefesh is gufo, refuas mammon is behemto. No, refuas nefesh is a reference to the fact that you could save his body, and refuas mammon is a reference to behemto. So, and refuas mammon is a reference to saving his animals. So now the Gemara actually flips, and its intention, we'll see in the round in a second, is to say that the patient is the one who said he doesn't want to get hana from the doctor. So in that scenario, you are only able to save the patient if he's about to die. Then you'd be allowed, even though there was a vow that the patient said he doesn't want to get any hana from the doctor, so assuming that the doctor can't save him. No, the Mishnah says he is allowed to save him. However, the doctor is not allowed to save the patient or whatever the other person if the animal is in danger. If the person's animal is in danger, the doctor would not be allowed to save the animal because again, the patient or the other person said he doesn't want to get hana from this doctor. Fine. And then Amar Zurta Bar Tovia, Amar Rav, Aval Omer Lo, Sam Ploni Yafa Lo, Sam Ploni Ralo. But the doctor is able to say, even in the case where it's usher, i.e. the animal case, he could say this certain medicine is good and this one is bad. Okay, we're not going to discuss that so much. But the Ran on that Gemara, which in the Darim, we don't typically read Rashi. The Ran is on the side of the Gemara in the Darim, and that's usually who we view as the quote unquote Rashi, just for Kasha Pshat in the Gemara. So we're going to start with the second Divrei Maso, Ela Refuas Nefesh Gufo. When we took man, we established this case. I spoke this out. The Shenechse Rofe Asurim Alachola, talking about where the doctor, the possessions of the doctor are usher on the chola, because again, the chola said he doesn't want to get animal from the doctor. When we shemhachi lo yirape behemto, he can't heal his animal. Fine, he can't heal his animal, but he is able to heal the actual patient. So now this is where it gets a little interesting. The Ran says, it is talking about a case where there is another doctor around. Because if there was no other doctor around and you were only doctor in town, for sure you would be able to save him. You wouldn't even have to come onto the whole chiddush of the Mishnah. You have the mitzvah of, as we saw before, you have to return the person to his previous self, and if he's sick, you 100% have to return him to his health if there was no other doctor around. So the Ran is saying that special chiddush here is even elavade, continuing, sheyesh rofe acher askina. We're talking about a case where there even is another doctor. Nevertheless, that's the whole chiddush over here, that you still would be able to save this person, even though there's a whole vow going on. Afilu halchim miraposo rifuas nefesh, tahinu gufo, you could save the person himself. And again, here's another integral line, min kol adam zocha leitzrapos, because a person does not merit to be healed by just anybody. And therefore, you could be that person who would be healing him. And therefore, you have to do that even though there's another doctor. And even though this person made a vow not to get any anal from you. And this is what is said in the Yerushalmi, and I put the Yerushalmi here. You don't have to go through it exactly, but that's exactly what the Yerushalmi points out. And you can see that in the last line. Lo mikol adam zocha leitzrapos. A person does not merit to be healed by just anybody. Good. So this is just one short proof to, I think, Rav Elyashiv, we'll see, we're going to quote him later. He quotes this Gemara as also the real source for that concept of lo min kol adam zocha leitzrapos. Because the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says, talking about Yisurim, it's actually a lot of Agada there, but it reads as follows: Kach Yisurim b'shal shemeshagrin oso ala adam maspian oso yasanik shvua lo telchu el biyom ploni lo tetzu el biyom ploni ubishal plonis v'ayidei ploni v'ayidei sam ploni. That when a person has Yisurim come upon him, he's only going to be able to be healed on a certain day, and only if he goes out at this time, and with a certain person, i.e. Ayidei ploni, through a certain doctor, Ayidei sam ploni, and only through a certain medication. So this is actually the source for the fact that it's really a spiritual aspect. It's not just that one doctor may be better than another, and you may not be the one who merits to save this person, but it's really almost a spiritual thing where you don't know who's going to be saving you. And therefore, that's incumbent. That makes, we'll see exactly what it is, whether it's a chiyuv or an iser, but therefore the doctor would have to go ahead and save this person, even if there are other doctors around, and even if there was a neder made on the doctor. Fine. So just a quick summary, because that was a lot of Gemaras. There are three main Gemaras that I'm discussing. Again, Virapo, Urape, I'm not necessarily discussing right now. But those three Gemaras are Baba Kama, Pei Aleph, and Beis, and that has the pasuk of Hashvosalo teaches us that when us return there's body to itself, body its original state, its original health. And then the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which asks, okay, so now that you have the pasuk of Hashvosalo, why when you have all these people in danger, whether they're drowning or you have a wild animal or you have armed robbers coming after them, why would you need the pasuk of Lo Samo to teach us that you would have to save them? You have the pasuk of Hashvosalo. That's what the Gemara says, that no, not only do you have to go ahead and do it yourself, save the person, you would even have to go ahead and use financial means to do so. And then the third Gemara in Nedarim, which makes things a little more complicated, is again where a patient makes a neder not to get enough from the doctor. And nevertheless, if that patient is he's sick or he's deathly sick, we'll see exactly how we would interpret that, but he's definitely sick. The doctor would be allowed to heal him, even if there are other doctors around. And again, even if there's a vow where he can't get any enough from the doctor, because of the concept of lo min kol adam zocha le'israfos, that a person does not merit to be healed by everybody, meaning there are only certain people who are sent from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save this patient. Good. So those are the summary of the three sources. Now I'm going to try to get into a little more practical. When we do that, there's an obvious question. Again, not necessarily a strong question, but really just trying to understand the full tokef, the full strength of the Gemara in Sanhedrin, where now that we have these two psukim about Hashivos and Lo Samod, what do we now do with the pasuk of Hashivos? Now that you have the pasuk of Lo Samod, where even according to Rashi, that teaches you have to do everything from A to Z. So then why do you need the pasuk of Hashivos? What special chiddush is there that Hashivos is coming to teach us? So there are two big nafkaminos. Just a point of introduction, we actually don't pass them like either of them, and I'll point that out again at the end, just to be very clear. The first one is the Minchas Chinuch, in Mitzvos Lo Taseh, Mitzvah Reish Lamed Zayin. He's discussing, unfortunately, if somebody is committing suicide or is trying to commit suicide. The Minchas Chinuch says that he may not have to go ahead and save that person. Again, point of introduction, we do not pass them like this. We'll see if Moshe argues with this. But just to see how he arrived at that conclusion, we're going to read. So he says, Niro l'chora, tim echan me'abed atzmo l'das. That means he's going to commit suicide. He's consciously, somewhat consciously, trying to kill himself. And somebody's able to save him. Efshar de'eno muzar alav. Sorry, 1 second. Right. Efshar de'eno muzar alav. Lo mibai da'ala say v'hativosa l'rabos avedas gupo. Vada eno matzuva. Ki aseh de'ashavas aveda eno noheges v'mama. V'aveda midas. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm not reading this so clearly. Let's start again. So niro l'chora. V'im echad me'abed atzma l'das. V'yachol echad lahatzilo. And somebody's able to save him. Efshar de'eno muzar alav. It's possible that he's not over on the lav of Lo Samod. I put the Gemara on this side. The Gemara on the right is the Gemara in Sanhedrin that we had before. It's possible that he's not over on Lo Samod. You're going to ask why. So we'll get there in a second. But Lo mibai da'alha say v'hashvos or v'hashivosa. Sorry, I think there may be a spelling there. V'hashivosa l'rabos avedas gufo, that we have, as we saw in the Gemaras previously, that V'hasivosalo is coming to teach us that you even have to return a person to his original state and not just a reference to a lost object. So it's not only that you're not over on that asay, Vada ina matzuva, ki asay da shavas aveda, ina no heges b'mamon ba'aveda midas. He says you're for sure not over on the mitzvah asay of V'hasivosalo. Why? Because just like by money, by monetarily, if a person takes his money and he says, I don't want this, it's aveda midas. He loses it on purpose, you don't have to return that money to him. So the same thing would apply now to the way we darshaned it before of a person's body. if he unfortunately decides that he doesn't, he's trying to lose his body, he would not have to save him from the pasuk of Ahashivotalo. But the Minchas Chinuch is saying, as we'll see in a second, even the law of Lo Samod, he also wouldn't be over. And we'll see exactly how he arrives at that right now. Again, even the law of Lo Samod, he's not over on. Why do I need this lav? When somebody's drowning, we already have the pasuk of Hashavat Aveda. So how Yachal Lomar. So now this is where we're going to see a theme. The next source is going to do the same thing. He says the Gemara could have answered Nafkamina b'ma'abed asma ladas. The Eino Matsuva ala Vedas Gufo kamo the Ein Matsuva ala Vedas Mimoda Midas. What the Gemara could have given a different answer. Again, we saw it before. I put it on the side again. That the Gemara was teaching us that Lo Sama teaches us that you have to expend money. And right, not only do you have to do it yourself, you also have to pay for somebody to do it. So the Minchas Chinuch says, but if I only had the pasuk of Ahashivotalo, where it taught me where if somebody loses his money on purpose, I don't have to return it to him. The pasuk of Lo Samad should have taught us that no, in that scenario, if a person is coming to do it on purpose, he jumps into the water, let's say, on purpose, the Gemara should have said it's coming to teach us that in that case also, I have the law of Lo Samad. That, sorry, not also. The Hashavotalo didn't have a problem because by money you would be allowed to just not return the money to him. So the pasuk of Lo Samad should have taught us the extra chiddush that no, in that case where he jumps in, I would have to save him. So from the fact that the Gemara doesn't do that, it comes to teach us that you're not over on that law. So let me just read that inside to make that a little clearer. The Gemara could have answered that the special chiddush of Lo Samad is coming to teach us by somebody who is jumping into the river, is coming to kill himself. Because if it was just from the pasuk of Ahashivotalo, I wouldn't have had to save him. In Cain, so from the fact that the Gemara does not say that the special chiddush of Lo Samad is come to teach me that I have to save a person who's committing suicide. So it must be that this pasuk of Lo Samad does not teach me that I would have to go ahead and save that person. So again, just to summarize, make it more clear. That was very verbose and doesn't usually always make it so clear. But from the fact that the Gemara does not say that the chiddush of Lo Samad has come to teach me that I have to save a person who's drowning, and rather it comes to teach me that I have to go ahead and spend money, it must be that Lo Samad does not apply, just like it doesn't apply to Ahashivotalo. When somebody throws his money away, you don't have to go ahead and save it. So if the person throwing his body away, you wouldn't have to go ahead and save him from the pasuk of Ahashivotalo. Also from the pasuk of Lo Samad, I wouldn't have to go ahead and save that person. That's what the Minchas Chinuch says. That's why that's really what the Ahashivotalo is also adding to. So that's the first nafkamina that the Minchas Chinuch says, where both from the way he's reading the Gemara, you would not have to save a person who's going ahead and committing suicide. The second nafkamina, this is the Shulchan Aruch, where it says Chayav Adam Lahatzah Chavero Bein Begufo Bein B'Mimona. So Haroas Chavero Tovei Banar Bayam, which is our Gemara, a list of Ban love, or Chayera Ba love, the Yachalat Silo Hu Ba'atzma, and he's able to save him. Oh, she is Charat. Achirim Lahatzil Below Hitzil, and or he's able to go ahead and spend money to have other people save him, and he didn't do that. Oh, Sheshama Akum. Okay, he goes on and on and on. Says at the end, over Lo Samad Dam Re'ah. Okay, so what we saw in our Gemara and Avodah Zarah. However, the Chachma Shlomo Kluger on the Shulchan Aruch says, we're not going to read the whole thing, but he goes along a very similar line to the Minchas Chinuch, and he says that this is, as I highlighted above, this is a, sorry, I can't see the top line because it's Zoom, but that it's a din chadash dainu dafka ino derech bizayon lehamasa. That you would have to go ahead and save a person who is drowning is only if there is no embarrassment to you who's saving the person who's drowning. And the reason for that is because just like by the pasuk of Hashiv, when you have to go ahead and return a lost object, right? The pasuk says Vesalamta, you're not allowed to close your eyes basically and not return the object. You have to return it. However, there are times that you are allowed to close your eyes, and that is the case of Zakin Ve'ino L'Sich Spodo. There's an elder, and it's not dignified for him to be going ahead and returning this lost object. He wouldn't have to do it. So just like by the Hashivosalo, we have that concept where you wouldn't have to go ahead and go beneath your dignity to go ahead and return a lost object. So too, by somebody who's drowning or the other scenarios where a wild animal is running after him or armed robbers. So too, in that scenario, he would not have to go beneath his dignity to go ahead and save that person. And again, that's a big nafkamina, because as we'll see in a minute, a lot of medicine, you do have to go beneath your dignity to treat a patient. And he does the same thing that the Minchas Chinuch did, and he says, because if I'm wrong, i.e. that a person would have to go beneath his dignity to go ahead and save somebody, the Gemara should have given that answer. The Gemara should have said that the special chiddush of lo samod is, if I only had the hashivosalo, I would know that I don't have to go beneath my dignity. But lo samod should teach me that I do have to go beneath my dignity. But the Gemara doesn't do that. The Gemara gives the answer where you have to go ahead and pay money. So it must be that just like the hashivosalo, you don't have to go beneath your dignity. So too lo samod, you don't have to go beneath your dignity. And then he says he's not sure because there's the Gemara elsewhere that maybe uproots it, but he's pretty adamant about this fact. Okay, so those were two nafkaminas about where Bahashivosalo would really be telling us also, quote unquote, about the mitzvah of lo samod, and you could take concepts that apply to returning a lost object into returning a lost soul. So as I mentioned earlier, Moshe argues actually on both of these farshim, and he explains that there is an obligation to save somebody who's committed suicide because of the idea that one's body is not his own. The Minchas Chinuch was going seemingly with the concept that his body is his own, and therefore, just like the person can disown his money, he can also disown his body. However, Moshe says it's not true because the person's body is not actually his own, and therefore would not be allowed to do that, and therefore he would have to save that person who unfortunately is trying to commit suicide. And then the second scenario, where a person would have to go beneath his dignity. So he actually says that Shmuel Kluger was thoroughly mistaken. Again, that's the English translation, but he thinks that Shmuel Kluger was totally wrong, because just like by being Machal Sabbath, Hashem, quote unquote, throws away disregards his own dignity by allowing us to be Machal Sabbath to save a life. So to a doctor, whenever he's coming to go ahead and save somebody, you have to put your honor and your kavod and your dignity aside, and really every act of helping somebody and saving somebody is not viewed as beneath your dignity, and it should be something that you do no matter what. So those were two special things, two nafkaminas, I should say, from why we would have both of those. And then one last point before we really summarize everything and wrap things up. This is the Torah Ha'adam. So the Torah Ha'adam is the Ramban. It's the Kisa Ramban, but a lot of the Shulchan Aruch actually by Hilchos Avelos and a lot of Bikur Cholim and all those sugyas and the Torah, a lot of the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah is based off straight from the Torah Ha'adam. And just to highlight a few points that he says with regards to this sugya, he says that it's. I'm just going to read the highlights. So again, the Rapa Yurape, the Gemara says he wrote the Rapos. So he says High Rishus, Rishus the mitzvah. When we say that it's the Rishus that's the mitzvah. The mitzvah L'Rapos L'Chlal Pikuach Nefesh. And it's a mitzvah to save somebody, and it's included in the mitzvah Pikuach Nefesh. So obviously that's if somebody is dying, but that would be the case, not if you're treating somebody for an acute illness. But when it comes to saving somebody's life, it would obviously be a mitzvah. And then he says further down, Pikuach Nefesh mitzvah Rabehi, the next highlight, and Hazar is b'chachma zu meshubach, somebody who really is scrupulous, is careful with this knowledge base, or the field of medicine, very praiseworthy. Nishol meguna v'asoel sofei saman. Okay, that's much spoken about your family, but yeah, if you have to ask whether you should be saving somebody, you're basically killing the person, the Yerushalmi says. And the next highlight is so if you're somebody who knows your craft, knows the refuah, you're board certified or whatever, then you're chayav to save a person. If you hold back from doing that, you're killing the person, and it's as if you killed the person. And then the hemshech is at the very end of that Ramban. He says, he quotes the Gemara that we had in the Darim, and then he says, again, like we had before, that you don't necessarily get married to be healed by anybody. The mitzvah is on you. And it's talking about the Hashavat Aveda of a guf, and that's where you would have to save the person. So the Shulchan Aruch codifies this, virtually a direct quote, and he says that Nasna Torah l'shus rosei l'rapos mitzvah hi b'chal pekuach nefeshu, just like the Ramban said, v'moneh atzmo harei zeh tzofich damim. And if you hold back, like you're killing the person. V'afilu yesh lo mi yishtir apenu, v'lo min kol adam zocha le'israpos. Okay, and then he goes on and explains more. But even if there is another doctor around, so we saw the Gemara Nedarim was discussing a case where a person made a neder, so even though he made a neder, the Ran said the special chiddush of the Gemara is that even if there's another doctor around, you'd be allowed to save him, even though there's a vow that you can't get a now from the doctor. But over here, we see the Shulchan Aruch is actually saying that l'halacha, you would have to be the one who goes ahead and does it yourself. Not in necessarily only a case of a vow, in any case, where even if there are other doctors around, you would have to go ahead and do it yourself. Okay, so this leaves us now with, this is really the summary tshuva about all these different scenarios. So again, just to summarize, we have the pasuk v'hashivot, we have the pasuk of lo samod, and then we have the Gemara Nedarim of lo min kol adam zochei l'srapos, and then we also have the Ramban, who basically says that if you hold back, it's like you're killing somebody. So the Yosef Shalom Al Yasher, that's Kovis Shuvos, I have a picture of him here. So he discusses basically the exact figure that we're discussing. Why? Because somebody posed that question to him. Is the doctor ever off? Is he able to take vacation? Is he able to really, I mean, they use extreme examples, but is he able to sleep? Is he able to eat? Is he able to do any of that stuff? Or does he have to always be on? Because again, we have these concepts of active mode and Roman called and Rapos. So maybe I'm going to be the one who's going to save this person. So maybe that should tell me that I have a chiyuv to go ahead and save this person no matter what. So I highlighted a lot of the points. I wrote them down over here. But really what the Rav Elyashiv tells us is that you have to start off with what scenario are we talking about? If we're talking about a case where somebody is actually dying, right? As the Gemara in Sanhedrin was saying, he's drowning, or he has a wild animal eating him up, or he has armed robbers, or anything like that. In that scenario, you have the pasuk of lo samod, and no matter what, I would have to go ahead and save that person, and I can't rely on the fact that there would be other doctors around, and that means I have to drop everything. I have to go save that person. However, in a scenario where you're doing day-to-day work of a physician, where I don't know, you're treating their coughs and colds and all that stuff and stomach issues, would you be allowed to take breaks? Would you be allowed to go eat, to sleep, and take vacation in a broader context? So he says 100% you would be allowed to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, the fact that you would need energy to go ahead and do your work when you're actually have to be doing your work, when you have scheduled times. And even when it's not scheduled times, you need strength to be able to do what you're doing, right? We know that there are very famous court cases with residents and hours working, stuff like that. And a lot of that has to do with a limit on the hours because they need rest. And the more you work and don't rest, the less good of a doctor you are, the more mistakes you're prone to make. So for sure, you would be allowed to take breaks. So then what do you do with the concept of lo min kol adam zocha le'israpos? So, meaning the person may not be merited to be healed by anybody, and maybe you're the one who's going to heal him. So that's a little bit difficult to answer and especially because the Shulchan Aruch seems to say that you're killing somebody if you don't save them. So the Rav Elyashiv says no. When the Shulchan Aruch says you're killing somebody, that's again talking about a case where the person's actually in a life or death scenario, and then if you don't go ahead and save them, it's as if you killed them. But in a case where it's again the day-to-day stuff, you would not necessarily have to be the one to go ahead and save that person, because this person can choose to go to somebody else. Meaning that the concept really goes both ways. Of Lomin Kol Adam Zocha L'Israpos is, I am the doctor, so I feel like I may be the one who's saving this person, but this patient can go ahead and ask somebody else, and maybe that somebody else is going to be the one who's saving the patient as well. So that's where, again, it gets a little bit iffy or a little bit hard to understand exactly how that would play out. But he definitely says that you would not be over on any Avera of Lo Samod. And if you would go ahead and treat a patient in that scenario, you don't have a chiyuv to. Lo min kol adam zocha d'Israbos does not tell me that there is a chiyuv to go ahead and heal this person. It's just, we don't know. We don't know who Hashem Shliach is going to be. So maybe it's you. So maybe you should go ahead and save this person. And therefore, if you do go ahead and, again, not save the person, if you go ahead and treat that person, you would get the mitzvah b'hashivoselo. You would go ahead because you're returning that person to his original state. But that doesn't necessarily tell me that I have to be the one who is doing it. So I think that really sort of opens this whole thing up and really allows us to understand when a doctor would be off and when he's allowed to say no. Again, the exact parameters are a little bit hard to pin down. We're going to go through a couple of scenarios where it's a little clear, but there are definitely going to be scenarios where it's not super. But how do I can't see the top of my thing. But a couple of different nafkaminas when it comes to all these psukim and concept that we discussed. So I can't see the top. Okay, cosmetic surgery, sorry. So if a doctor is doing cosmetic surgery, it's hard to say that he falls into any of these concepts, because Hashavosalo, returning his body, meaning if he's sick, so you're healing his body. Cosmetic surgery, it's really elective. It's because you want a little more aesthetic, so you want to look a little better. You wouldn't necessarily say that's returning the person to his original state of healthiness. There's definitely no samod involved. And even the lomin kol adam zocha d'Israpos, again, you're not really healing them. You're doing cosmetic work. So in that scenario, none of this would really apply, right? And therefore, it's hard to say that you're really, I mean, maybe you're doing chesed, maybe you could say, but it's hard to say that you fall into any of these categories of mitzvah that a doctor, typical doctor, or a different category of doctor, I should say, would be doing. And that plays itself out also in osek mitzvah, pater min mitzvah, because if you don't fall into any of the categories that we discuss, then you wouldn't necessarily be considered osek mitzvah, pater min mitzvah, and then that gets into issues where maybe then you're not pater from tefillah or other mitzvahs or things like that. So that's definitely something to consider. And then also with regards to spending more than a fifth of your money, so we know the Gemara, we saw the Gemara, that if you win it out from lo samod, so that's actually a lo saseh. And the Gemara said you would have to spend money. And it didn't say exactly how much money, but by mitzvahs lo saseh, there's no limit. And that could possibly be, I put over here, that could possibly be Pshat and Rashi, where he says you have to be master kol tzaddik. You have to go through you have to flip over every stone, go A to Z, because it's a lo saseh now. But again, that's only if somebody's life is really in danger. If it's just day-to-day activities of a physician, then you have the hashivosalo. The hashivosalo is then an asay, and by assays, right, al yivazeh is yotzer mi chamish. So you wouldn't have to spend more than a fifth of your money. But possibly, if you learn out from Bahashivosalo, again, this is another nafkamina, you wouldn't even have to spend too much extra money, because by a lost object, the Gemara says you wouldn't have to spend too much money to return that lost object. So just as much as you wouldn't have to spend too much money by a lost object, and somebody who quote unquote lost his soul or his body, you wouldn't have to spend too much money in that as well. So that's another nafkamina that may come out, whether it's the say or the lo saseh. Rest time and vacation. So we saw Rabbi Yasser said 100%. The doctor would be allowed to take rest, and he should take rest. And also with recent, there's obviously a lot of studies now with burnout and all that. He has to be able to perform his righteous duties, and rest is 100% necessary. And again, he's not over on anything, because the Hashavosalo doesn't obligate me. The Lomin Kol Adam Zocha L'Israbos doesn't obligate me. Again, if I do it, then I'm kind of the mitzvah of the hashiv lo. And lo samo again is really going to be in cases of life or death. And then also the other two cases that we mentioned earlier, Zaken Vein and Lefich Chodo and Ma'abed Atzma L'das, both of those we saw Rav Moshe said that there's no such thing as below your dignity when it comes to being a doctor, which is a very important Musar point as well. And really, you should view everything as within your scope, and no case should be too low for you. And then also, Ma'abed Atzma L'das, if somebody is unfortunately trying to commit suicide, the Hashavot would not tell me that I don't have to save that person. You do have the pasuk of lo samod. Tell me that I would be machayef, that I have a chiyuv to save that person. I think that is it. So going back to the scenarios that we discussed earlier, so when you have the person coming to you with like the bar mitzvah, and they say the doctor's about to go to a bar mitzvah, and the patient says, no, you're my primary care doctor. I feel like you're the one who's going to be able to help me, you know me best and all that. So again, there's going to be no clear answer whether you're right or wrong. You're definitely, the clear answer that we have here is that you're not over nabir if you turn that down. And again, that's a very serious concept, because that's coming to tell me that this whole field is a mitzvah. And therefore turning down this field, you may think then possibly doing an avera. So that we learn that is not the case. And would you then have to go ahead and do it? Not necessarily. Again, as we pointed out, if you did do it, you would obviously be in kind of the mitzvah of Hashavot Salo. But lo min kol adam zocha l'israpos. Again, the person can go ahead, if you're in a town with other doctors, they can go ahead and ask somebody else. If you're in a town by yourself, then okay, that's a different scenario, and maybe then you would have a chiyuv. And then the other scenario where somebody comes knocking on your door on a Friday night, because they found out you were in town and they want you to check out their grandmother or something like that, that I think there's even less of a chiyuv to say that you would have to go, because that's not even, before with the patient, the first scenario was the patient saying that they think you know them best, and they think that you would be the one who merits to heal their child. But in the second scenario, it's just they know you're around, they know you're good, so they want you to come and see your grandmother. Again, you would not have that chiyuv. So that wraps the Chabura up. There weren't any questions until now, but if anybody wants to ask anything, we can definitely discuss.